Welcome, everyone, to the April 24th meeting of the Sonoma County Transportation and Climate Authorities Technical Advisory Committee. We will start, as always, with introductions.
Edie Takata, City of Rohnert Park.
Elissa Overton, City of Sebastopol.
Ashley Cotter, City of Sonoma.
Frank Scott, City of Cotati.
Brendan Barrett, Town of Windsor.
Hunter McLaughlin, Sonoma County Public Infrastructure.
Derek Montani, City of Cloverdale.
Dave Ripperda, SCTCA.
Shauna Gauze, SCTCA.
And the SCTCA peeps in the back, want to shout out? Thanks, everyone. And anyone online, can we just jump in, shout out your name?
Rachel Lead, Santa Rosa City Bus.
Rob Sprinkle, City Santa Rosa.
Jeff Stutzman, City of Petaluma.
I was going to let the normal participants go first, but guest speaker Britt Tanner from MTC, and I'm here with Joel Schaefer and Mika Miyasato, who's actually with AC Transit, but we're here for the transit priority policy for roadways.
Great, thank you. And Tarina.
Hi.
Hey. With that, opening it up for public comment. I'm not sure if we had any public on Zoom. All right, thank you. On to approval of meeting minutes from March 27th. Anyone have comments? Seeing none, meeting minutes are accepted. On to the feature presentation, the MTC presentation on transit priority policy for roadways.
Hi, that's my cue. Hi, I'm Britt Tanner. As I had just said, I'm with MTC. I work in the regional network management section on transit priority. And actually, Mika, can you turn off the screen share for a second? Can I get a quick share of hands? How many of you have actually seen or heard about the transit priority policy for roadways before today? And how many are seeing it for the first time? Okay, so now we can start sharing. I just wanted to explain that I'm going to be going through some basic stuff, and I apologize that it's going to be repetitive for some of you, but I just wanted to make sure that this was new to most of you before I figured out how to tailor the presentation. So next slide. I'm with the regional network management section, which is a relatively new section at MTC. And I just wanted to frame for you why we are here. MTC is working regionally to improve transit priority to improve transit throughout the Bay Area. There are some older initiatives that you may have heard of, the transit performance initiatives, the forward commute initiatives. And then we have some newer things that we're working on, which includes this policy and its outgrowing work, as well as a couple grant programs, Bus Aid and IDEA, that are ongoing currently. But I'm here to talk about that middle yellow box, the transit priority policy for roadways. Next slide. So why do we care about transit priority first? Transit priority, are things, yeah?
Can you pause just for a second?
Sure.
I think Ross is going to change the volume.
Picture the best audio in the room. You want to go ahead and speak again? We'll see how that.
Hi, how are you? I love transit.
Not better.
Is that good?
It sounds like maybe it's coming, the presentation is coming from the TV as opposed to the sound system.
I'm going to keep speaking. Transit priority is awesome. However, it's not just an urban thing. It can apply everywhere. You figured it out? I'll just keep speaking. Or not. I can talk through this slide while you sort it out. I we'll just read this slide and then I'm going to audio describe the pictures on the right while you figure this out. So the picture on the top right is in downtown Oakland. It's a curbside bus lane and there's an AC Transit bus in it. Below that, there is a picture of a bus that's getting transit signal priority. And below that, we have a picture of a bulb out on Geary. I know you're troubleshooting audio issues. I'm just trying to figure out if you can. I'm going to keep talking so that you know once it's worked out. That's all right. Bottom left picture is a bulb out on the 38 Geary. And you can tell that it's a bulb out because it's a bus bulb, because behind it, you can see that there's actually some parking spaces next to the curb behind where the passengers are waiting. And then I have some examples of transit priority that you might not think of as transit priority, and that is just simple turn restrictions where you can get rid of a bottleneck with a left turn restriction. If there's an area where traffic congestion gets worse and you need to make people try and get rid of bottlenecks that are created due to a high turn demand and you can't find another solution to it, like a left turn lane, you could have a left turn restriction. You could also just use loading zones to make sure that curb space is free so that people aren't double parking, and really tailor the hours to the areas of need. So for example, have a loading zone in the morning and then turn it into parking in the afternoon. For example, if you've got a restaurant that has deliveries in the morning, but they want to make sure they have parking available for patrons in the afternoon. I think I'm going to stop now.
Go ahead, Britt.
Yeah, how is it going? Did you fix it?
It's functional, but
It's
I'm gonna
functional.
keep working on it, but you can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should be good for now. I will focus on the important things, of course. So we are having this policy because transit is important. But before we do that, we want to explain what we mean by transit priority. And so transit priority in this definition are just roadway changes or policies that you do to make the transit move more quickly and more reliably. So bus lanes and other traffic engineering changes can help you get out of congestion, transit signal priority, doing things like building bus bulbs at high volume stops so that buses don't have to pull in and out of traffic, or just, spacing your bus stops in the right location, making sure that they're on the far side past a traffic signal or near side when there's a stop sign. These all make transit move more predictably and reliably. Next slide. And doing transit priority is important, especially right now, because as we've all seen, traffic is getting worse, so is transit. Transit is getting slower. It's gotten 5% slower since 2016. And what that means is that you end up actually spending more money to operate the same amount of service. And so if you have a bus that takes a one-way trip of 60 minutes and that bus got 10% slower, you're actually spending $500,000 more a year to provide the same number of trips for a passenger, because you need to have more buses on that route. These things that we're talking about can help reduce the operating costs. TSP can reduce travel times by 10%, and an AC Transit example. And some of the bigger projects that Muni had done had travel time savings of up to 31%. But some of the smaller ones where you just do a little bit here and there, they've had travel time reductions of 10%. So you can do a little bit and still have a significant impact. Next slide. This policy is building on other visionary documents for the Bay Area. I'm not going to go into them, but it's building off of goals and visions set by Plan Bay Area and the Transit Transformation Action Plan, which was an outcome of the COVID-19 response. Next slide. So specifically what I'm here for is for the transit priority policy for roadways, which is where we're trying to set a regional goal for promoting the transit rider experience through implementing transit priority infrastructure and policies and helping improve the interagency coordination that's needed to do that. This is all just so we can improve transit travel time and reliability and make sure that people's needs for transit and that we can move more people in the Bay Area through better transit. Next slide. This is the summary slide of everything, and I'm going to go into the details, so you don't need to read everything here. But basically, why I'm here is to tell you what we're doing with this transit priority policy. It's going to apply to all roadways in the 9-county Bay Area that have scheduled fixed route transit, including surface streets and access control highways. This policy is going to recommend that we create a transit priority network, which I'll explain in a moment. And that TPN, Transit Priority Network, will inform regional funding priorities, and also define where you might need to look to incorporate additional transit supportive design elements into your projects as they're coming through. It also will describe how this coordination will happen through the Complete Streets checklist to encourage better coordination between right-of-way agencies and transit agencies. And then we'll also encourage the adoption of local transit priority policies. For example, if a city were to adopt a transit priority policy, they would potentially get a priority or extra points when they're applying for a grant. So I'm going to go into the details. Next slide. Where would the policy apply? I should step back and say that when I say that this policy will apply for all roadways with transit service, that means a fixed route service where you have, a transit route that's drawn on a map and it runs on a regular schedule. Those are the streets where we're looking at having this policy apply. The actual network hasn't been developed yet, so we just kind of made one up on this picture on the right. And most transit routes would probably be those lighter orange streets where they have transit, but they're not a main corridor. And then there are those transit priority network corridors, which is the thick blue line, where you would have higher expectations for how the review process would happen along those corridors. The transit priority network is going to be developed through a separate process that we're going to be kicking up in 2026. And it's going to be based on approved existing plans. So if you already have a transit plan or a transportation or a general plan that you've already approved, we'll use that as an input. We'll also be looking at existing service frequencies and ridership, equity and priority development areas, and then also context. We realize that we're not going to look at the frequency of a bus route in San Francisco and then compare it to one up in North Bay and say, oh, well, clearly there's no routes of significance in Sonoma or Solano. Like we're going to be more context sensitive and have different thresholds based on the local context. Next slide. Where this really applies is that this policy will be taken into consideration whenever you're applying for an MTC discretionary grant that is over $250,000. And this is an existing criteria that any grant that is applying for more than $250,000 in regional discretionary funds already has to complete the Complete Streets checklist. And it has to go to the local bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. So that green bubble that we show you on the right is what you already have to do. All streets that are applying for, all projects that are applying for $250,000 in regional discretionary funds need to go to a BPAC. They need to be, if they're on the active transportation network, which you can look for online, they have to be consistent with any approved plan, Complete Streets plan for that street. And they need to follow NACTO all ages and abilities design principles and PROAG, which is, of course, I can't remember what it stands for. It's basically applying the accessibility standards for roadways. What we are proposing is the two additional boxes on the right, which correlate with those colors on the previous slide. So if you're a street that is applying, if you're a project on the street that's on a transit route, but not on the TPN, those projects will be required to coordinate with the transit agency just for a review to impacts the transit service. So for example, if you're a project that you want to put in a pedestrian bulb on a corner, we will just ask that the transit agency take a look and say, hey, once that ped bulb is put in, are you still going to be able to make that right turn that the transit road needs to? And maybe it'll require some input about where that that pedestrian bulb is placed. It's just a coordination to make sure that there's no impacts to the transit service. However, streets that are on the actual transit priority network, those routes that are of higher importance for transit, those will need to follow best practice transit supportive design principles, which we'll go into on the next slide. Next, so those design principles will be basically looking at something like NACDO's Transit Street Design Guide, but it could be other local guidance. AC Transit already has their own design guidelines. Santa Clara BTA has some guidelines. We realize that it has to be very context sensitive. And so what works in San Francisco might not work up in North Bay. So we really want to look for the context sensitive standards for making sure that you're incorporating transit into a project. So some examples of how that could look include, next slide, on a very urban environment, if you have a bike lane and a bus stop and you wanted to get rid of what's happening on the left, where in order to get to a bus stop, the bus has to cross the bike lane and then the bus has to cross the bike lane to get to the bus stop, causing conflicts between people biking and people riding the bus, the safety concern. It also adds delays. On the right, you can see that they added a boarding island, and that made it so that the bike lane was protected and there was no longer that conflicting path. Next slide. But it doesn't have to be like that in all areas. For example, here's how it could look in a more suburban context. This is from Fremont. This is a very similar concept. There was a bus stop that was right next to a bike lane. And what they did was they kept the bike lane on the street, as you can see, kind of in the far distance beyond the bus stop pole. But at the bus stop, they widened the sidewalk just slightly and then had the bike path go up onto the sidewalk and made it into a sidewalk level bikeway to eliminate that conflict between bikes and buses at the bus stops. Next slide. And then the last thing that I wanted to go through is the optional local resolution on transit priority. Some cities already have adopted their own local resolution, and we're just saying that if there was an interest in showing local support for transit priority, you could also adopt your own local priority policy, or you could just adopt a local resolution that supports transit, the larger transit priority policy, or it could be an update to a local complete streets resolution or other policy to make sure that it's reflecting that transit is a priority. We will provide some templates for what would be the minimum requirements, and if those are adopted, the local jurisdiction could get some extra bonus points when applying for some of our funding opportunities. And I believe I was supposed to hand it over to Mika on this slide, so I apologize, and I will do that on the next slide.
Thanks, Britt. Britt did go into many of the policy detail, so I'll just go over, what does policy expect for agencies to do? So, you heard from Britt that local jurisdiction, especially at one that applying for the grants, they would need to coordinate with transit agency, and they will, try to review if there is any impacts to transit service. And if project is on the transit priority network, incorporate best practice transit supportive design elements. And also, we've heard from, we've heard frequently what happens if a local jurisdiction and transit agency could not agree on what project should be or what this potential transit supportive design elements could be. So one of the ideas that we've heard is that, third party like county transportation agency, or it could be MTC, could convene discussion to advance local jurisdictions and transit agency solution and, help develop agreements. And another things that we did hear is that, many of the local jurisdictions may not have technical expertise or staffing resources. So they're looking towards, requesting technical assistance opportunities on transit priority. So I did see earlier that some of you raised a hand. So we did conduct the early round of the outreach in the winter between February and March, and presented earlier version of this transit priority policy, a TPPR, to the various groups. And we did hear from 50 different agencies about, received about 350 comments. And now we are in the spring 2025 outreach. And you're the second group where we are presenting, and we're going around the Bay Area to receive input from various stakeholders. So I like to point out that the ones that you'll be receiving you'll be receiving 2 items. Summary of a February, March engagement. That's, that some of you participated earlier. So you'll be able to see, what your comments were and how we are responding. And also that, the revised policy memo. If you attended earlier meeting, you have received a draft policy memo, but we'll have a revised policy memo, which provides an overview of the proposed TPPR contents and what the requirements, proposed requirements. So we're in the draft policy development phase. And as shown earlier, we'll engage various groups for input before finalizing the policy. We'll consider the feedback from the various stakeholders throughout this engagement in the spring. And we are planning to engage regional network management bodies in summer and fall. And as Britt mentioned earlier, that regional transit assessment is a separate but parallel task that helps implementing a policy. Through the regional transit assessment, we'll be developing transit priority network. So we expect the development of transit priority network to start sometimes later in 2025, and hoping to have that network adapted later in 2026. So as you can see, there will be a gap after we have the final TPPR final policy being approved, and there's a gap till the TPN will be adapted later in that year. So again, that I mentioned that there will be 2 items that you'll be receiving: summary of the engagement and a revised policy memo. And here we are providing a list of discussion questions to guide your review while you will be reviewing those policy memos. So I'm not going to go through, but please just take this as a reference as you review those 2 items you'll be receiving after this meeting. And this concludes our presentation. And here's the contact information for 3 of us. Today you heard from Britt and I, but we also have a Joel Schaefer online, and the 3 of us are working on this TPPR. And you can reach to us separately via email, or you can send an email to us, transitpriority@bayareametro.gov. And please look out for revised draft policy memo in soon, perhaps as early as next week. And we plan to, and please review and provide us feedback by early June.
And as Stephanie Hom is also here from MTC, and so we're happy to answer any questions. And if you have any questions in the room, it would be really helpful for us if you could state your name and what city you're with.
Questions? Yes.
I just start nodding my head. I'm Tarina Wilson. I'm with the city of Santa Rosa. And Rob and Rachel are here too, because we've seen the presentation a couple times. And so we've had some thoughts and questions come up, and I guess I could kick it off. One of mine is there's also the active transportation network and obviously complete streets policies that a lot of our jurisdictions have adopted. And so I get curious about how different mode priority is prioritized on different segments. And so the active transportation network so far is saying, okay, on these corridors, we're going to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian safety. And there's a high chance that when this transit network comes out, there's a lot of overlap. And so it would be helpful to know what actually gets prioritized in what situation. And it might be that the local jurisdictions maintain some discretion over that decision. I know on some routes, like maybe ones where we have more frequent headways, it might make sense to do transit first. But then on other ones that are more suburban and our bus system might not be as supported, we would want to try to prioritize active transportation. So maybe this is a comment saying that local discretion could be helpful. I did like something that I noticed in this presentation that I didn't in the others. I think that's just my fault, not yours, is that one of the things we could do is edit our complete streets policy instead of adopting a transit specific one. I like the idea of revisiting what we already have, because then we would go in and we would have a complete streets like multimodal approach to everything and have some more flexibility. And then I had a couple others. One is, and this doesn't need to be answered right now, but it'll be helpful to know how we would demonstrate coordination with a transit agency. So is it that, you know, I have a project coming up, I would like a complete streets checklist from MTC, and then do I send an email to City Bus or Sonoma Transit or whoever it is, and they confirm over email that we've reviewed, or is there some other document or process that we would need to demonstrate to you? And then I had one other question, which was, how is the TP network going to get created and vetted? I assume that it's similar to the process of the AT network, but I started at Santa Rosa towards the end of that process, so I'm not entirely familiar with how that happened. So maybe that's the only question I have where I would appreciate an answer.
All right, so I'm actually going to try and respond to all three really quickly. The first one is, the first question was about local jurisdiction, who prioritizes it, and it's absolutely up to local jurisdictions to make those priorities. However, when there is an overlap between the two networks, if there is a conflict between the transit agency and the local jurisdiction, we would for there to be a way for us to help ensure that there's a conversation about what the priorities are, but we are not going to step in and say, okay, you adopted, this is a transit priority street, you have to put in a bus bulb. It's definitely up to local jurisdictions for that, where that conversation should be held. And that is going to be reflected in the memo that you'll see coming out soon. How would you demonstrate coordination? There's actually, right now, there's the Complete Streets Checklist, which is done online through a Google form, and they're in the process of upgrading that to more of a dashboard similar to the TOC policy, but basically, instead of it being a one-time Google form that you fill out and you can never change and you have to do it all in one sitting, it's going to be something that you could log into and upload documents to, and then see kind of a back and forth and find out the status on it. One of the things that we're going to do is have there be a place where you can upload that email between you and Santa Rosa City Bus that just says, hey, Rachel, I want to do this thing. Rachel says, hey, that sounds great. Thank you. Upload that and you're done. If that doesn't happen on your side, we can help with the coordination with the transit agency if needed. And there is an expectation that if the transit agency is asked to review, they should respond within 30 days. And the last one, how is the TPN going to be created and vetted? We're hiring consultants right now to do the regional transit assessment, and they're going to be helping us with that. And we're continuing a group called the Transit Priority Working Group and the Policy Development Working Group, which are two groups that are working on this issue. And we have city jurisdictions that are on the Policy Development Working Group that will be continuing to work on that. I don't know offhand which cities are on it.
City of Santa Rosa is part of the team.
So they're on it. So you have a channel directly into the development of the TPN that's going to be created and vetted. And the vetting, we are going to be working through stakeholders to get that developed.
Thank you for those questions. Any more, Tarina? No?
I did have another one come up, which is On one of your slides, you talked about wanting to incorporate design into projects that are part of NACTO's transit design guidelines. I can't remember the exact name. We sometimes have an issue in Santa Rosa where if a guideline like is published by NACTO, if a certain design is not also adopted as a standard into the MUTCD, we don't have as much flexibility. So we have to go for what's in the MUTCD. And so I don't know, Rob is usually the one who reminds me of this all the time because he's the one that ends up showing up in court if, you know, something does go wrong. And so I guess that's just a consideration for us, is that we can't always just pick something from a guideline. So we might be limited in some areas of what we could implement.
Yes, that's something that is also, we got a lot of feedback on that in our first round of the policy memo that was sent out. And we do acknowledge that we are referring to the NACTO Transit Streets Design Guide as a guide. And there are legal restrictions about what the MUTCD requires, which are things that you can defend in court. That being said, we wanted it to just be an opportunity for a conversation about what you might want to consider. And then you have the ultimate discretion of deciding how the project is designed within the city, as long as that conversation is happening. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions in the room?
I have a
Yes.
question. Shauna Gauze, SCTCA. This pertains more directly to your presentation itself. When you showed examples of, you know, before and after the San Francisco street where the bus island has been moved out, or in the suburban example of the sidewalk that had been opened up and then the bike lane had been moved onto the sidewalk briefly. I think it might be helpful particularly for jurisdictions in the North Bay, if you had some more North Bay examples that were context sensitive, because this is something that people are going to have a hard time wrapping their heads around. So something that is effective and acceptable and, you know, fits the policy would be helpful in your presentation.
I agree. And if you have any context sensitive examples, please send them our way. We've been asking for examples to highlight if possible.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Rachel Eid has her hand up.
Rachel.
Everyone, and Britt and Mika, thanks for being here, and Joel. I know Matt has been sitting on the committee and probably could answer this question, but just I wanted to ask one question because I think it's relevant not just to Santa Rosa, but perhaps all the jurisdictions that have fixed route transit service. If we have, for the purposes of defining what roadways would fall under this policy, if we have an adopted plan that shows, say, like a route extension, it's not in place yet, but it's planned, would that also be, that segment also be subject to this policy, you know, even if the service isn't in place at the time, say, a project's coming forward?
I can take that question. So this is Mika Miyasato with AC Transit. I'm working with MTC team on the regional transit priority policy. And what we are intending at this time is a proposal is that existing and proposed, but proposed as in approved as something already budgeted. So one of the things that we are proposing is that TPN, and along with, you know, you probably know this, but a CS policy already has provision that it will get reviewed every, I believe, like 4 years cycle. And we'll like to have a similar policy, similar requirements for TPPR and perhaps the RTA and TPN itself. So this is, you know, we are creating for the first time, but one of the things we would develop is how often should we revisit TPN as well as the RTA and TPPR. So that's why that we are proposing to have planned but approved or budgeted service changes.
I think that makes sense. And I just want to draw a quick distinction between approved versus budgeted, because I think a lot of transit agencies are in the situation now, we have an approved, adopted plan and zero
Yes.
budget to implement it. So if those, as long as those two things are
It's
taken
just, yeah,
separately.
we're trying to figure out the best words to describe the short-term planned
Mhm.
improvements opposed to long range, like,
Right.
the something to be implemented 10 years from now.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that makes it easier to do the things that should be done in the short term to support those truly short term and likely to happen service changes, without getting too bogged down in, vision stuff. So thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? Seeing none, oh, yep, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, to be a latecomer. Well, I'm happy to see that there are other options other than just traffic signal preemption, because when I was initially looking at this, I was thinking this is an onion. I don't know if we want to start peeling, because there are so many different levels of and across jurisdictional boundaries and what a nightmare that could be. So I'm happy to see that it encompasses a lot more things than just the traffic signal operations and preemption. One of the things I noticed though in the schedule is that the TPN they're going to be established after the policy is finalized. And is there an I mean, if we don't know what locations we're going to have our TPN, would that have any effect on the policies and within the policies that we're reviewing, I guess? I don't know. It just seems like the policy should go after that's established.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So the reason why we're moving towards having the transit priority policy adopted this year is to align with the update with the complete streets policy, which is happening at the same time. And both of those are aimed to be adopted at the end of this year so that they are in effect when the OBAG 4 money is kind of released next year. Not knowing if a street is going to be on the TPN or not basically means that anything that's a fixed route transit or a planned budgeted route or whatever the wording ends up being would be subject to that review, the conversation of, do you have transit impacts or not? Until we adopt what the TPN is, the requirement to potentially do that higher level of review for transit streets design won't apply to any streets until the transit priority network is adopted.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you, everyone, for great presentation and great questions. Appreciate Rachel and Rob joining us for that. With that, we'll move on to item 5, Transportation Fund for Clean Air and TDA 3. Presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the item before you is the adoption of the TFCA program of projects for fiscal year 25-26. As we discussed a couple of months ago, we had a change in the policy to get rid of the set aside for the transit operators as a pilot program for this upcoming fiscal year, and to instead base it solely on the competitive cost effectiveness score. We received a total of 5 applications, 2 from the city of Petaluma, 1 from the county, 1 from city of Santa Rosa, and 1 from SCTA. And those 5 applications fit the available funding. So at this time, we're recommending your approval of the program and projects for fiscal year 26. I should note for future fiscal years, we are working with the Air District to see if we could potentially do a multi-year call for projects as part of our larger SCTA funding program, cycle 2, that we'll be discussing later on in the agenda today. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Just a clarification. So you said the 5 applications fit within the existing funding budget?
Yeah, so there was about 655,000 available, and we're able to adjust the scopes of the ST application to fit what funding was available.
Great. Questions?
I'm a chatty Kathy today.
Please.
I'm curious because this is our first time doing, we're doing the pilot. And I think part of the purpose was to see if jurisdictions who don't usually apply were more interested in applying. And so I'm curious for jurisdictions who maybe haven't applied in the past / didn't apply this time, if there was feedback on that. I assume we talk about that at a future meeting, but was just curious if anyone had feedback now. All right,
So the question is why didn't others apply?
correct.
Healdsburg is out of the district, so we cannot as Cloverdale.
That makes sense.
But, you know, I don't know if Roner Park or anyone else thought about it.
No bandwidth to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is-
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I wasn't there at that time, but I know there were a lot of empty seats during this time, so.
Yeah.
no doubt. It was on anybody's radar.
Okay.
Because sometimes when these things change from what they always have been to something new, it takes a little while to kind of figure out, oh, there's
Yeah.
something we can apply for. So, you need an action.
We're recommending approval of the list of projects to the board.
Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the project.
Well, second.
We have a motion and a second. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that passes. And the victory cheer. On to item number 6, 6.1, informational item only. Measure M and Go Sonoma invoicing obligation status. It's in the packet unless there's something else from staff. Nope. No questions? Read it and follow up as necessary. Similarly, in item 7.1, the inactive federal obligation status. Currently inactive, Roner Park, Sonoma, County of Sonoma. Anyone have any questions on that? On to 7.2, the draft SCTCA funding program cycle 2 evaluation criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as David mentioned earlier, we are getting ready and we have previewed this to this group already, but the intent is to come forward with a call for projects for the SCTCA funding program in June, which means we wanted to make sure that you had eyeballs on the evaluation criteria prior to that happening. So this is the draft proposed evaluation criteria. We are taking comments and feedback. Happy to answer any questions that you might have about the criteria as they are listed in the packet.
And this is PDF page 41 of 68, correct?
That's correct. And it should look pretty familiar. This is very similar to what we did last time for cycle 1. The major difference is that the point values have changed slightly. Last cycle, there was 185 total points. Now there are 200 total points.
Thank you.
When is the deadline for feedback?
I would say the Friday after the board meeting is on the 12th, so that would be the 17th. 16th? Friday. Okay.
Yeah, and so as Shauna mentioned, we're planning to bring the final version of the scoring criteria back to this committee at your May meeting, which I believe is May 22nd.
Yeah, so maybe the 15th would be great.
Question about the written tribal mitigation funds that are new. Is there something, any characteristic of it that we're trying to do? Like the other ones, I mean, like Ped and there goes Sonoma, so it's new, so I don't recognize it.
So at this point, there was a previous agreement between the county and Graydon that to receive funds. And as part of that agreement, SCTA received about $2 million annually to go towards improvements towards Highway 101. And once the improvements on Highway 1 were complete, it was eligible for any improvements on arterials or collectors south of Highway 12 between Highway 12 and the county line. So at this point, the county's new agreement with Graydon doesn't specifically name SCTA, and where Roanoke has their own agreement with the tribe. We're in the process of developing an agreement with the county to memorialize ongoing contribution from the county to SCTA of those funds, about 2 million annually, and then setting the parameters of what can they be spent on and in what locations. And it'll probably be similar to the previous agreement. It's probably some question on whether or not it can overlap with, say, improvements that Roanoke Park is funding through the tribe, but that's kind of the guardrail. It's probably improvements to arterials and collectors, whether that's street condition or if that's transit, still to be determined at this point, but we just have a projected amount in the staff report.
Any other questions? Yep. Hi, Joanne.
Hi. At the risk of bringing up an unsolvable problem, the one thing that's different in the world than last time is the federal fund risk that everybody may or may not be facing right now. And I'm just wondering if we could have a gut check on this whole call for projects relative to what's happening federally. I'm sure everybody has projects at risk. We have an extraordinary amount of projects at risk. I don't know what today's love letter from the federal government means in terms of that conversation, but I feel like I should have a lawyer with me all the time now. But anyway, I just want to, I don't know what the answer is, but I do think we should like address the big thing in the room, which is we may not all be building the thing that we think we have funding to build. And can this call for projects, is it an opportunity to help at all? Or is it just over promising things that we may never get for the next foreseeable future for the federal side? That's all.
That's words of wisdom, but I think as the transportation and climate authorities, we have a mandate to, you know, try to comply with our CTP and the regional transportation plan. And and you do too, I know.
But I want to be clear, I'm not talking about equity and climate. I'm all for that. I don't think you should change any of that. I'm saying projects on the table right now that we all think are fully funded, we can't be the only ones that are thinking that our projects aren't fully funded anymore. That's all. And is there any acknowledgement that everybody who has federal money planned, programmed, counted on to complete projects, is there, you know, should there be any addressing of that issue? I think it's fine to keep all the values that we all hold collectively together in this space on the table. I just mean for the non-federal money that you're programming, can it compensate?
Well, so Joanne, just to weigh in, I think previously we've discussed we do not want to fund cost increases on projects, or if the, in your case or others, if they lose a grant, do we want to come back and fill that in? And I can't answer that today. I think the dynamic in DC is changing every day, and so we don't know what's going to happen. We have our own federal grants. They're kind of tenuous right now that we're hoping will still come through. But when it comes to this call for projects, we still need to move forward with something. I don't know what that something is going to be, but we still need to be able to do the call for projects, see what the local priorities and the transit operators' priorities are, and whether that is asking for money for previous projects. Maybe that is something that we can consider. We do have a variety of local and state funds that are pretty secure that will be part of this call for projects, and then the OBAG 4 funds should be fairly secure since they're federal formula funds, but we are cognizant that there are federal discretionary grants that have been awarded to SMART, to SCTA, to City Santa Rosa, and others that are at risk, and those projects are important projects and we want to see them happen. And if we need to find other ways to fund them, that's something we can talk about.
Thank you for the question. We're thinking the same thing. I have a question regarding the OBAG, because OBAG is going to be later than the rest of this. So we're going to submit applications, or our priority list followed by applications. And some of them are going to be awarded, but OBAG projects will not until a later date.
And so we kind of outlined it in the staff board. There's a little timeline at the end of it. So we'll do the call for projects in June. Applications are due in August. The first tranche of funding, similar to the previous cycle that'll come up, is the State Transportation Improvement Program. So we'll be taking action on that in September. The rest of the projects will be scored at that point over the next few months after that, including looking at what projects are the best fit for OBAG 4 funds, what jurisdictions are in compliance with MPC's requirements for federal funds, and really seeing what projects would be best to nominate to MPC for OBAG 4 funds. So MTC is going to launch their call for projects for OBAG 4 in March of 2026. Probably by midsummer of 2026, we'll know what projects we want to nominate for OBAG 4. Those projects that we are nominating for OBAG 4, we're going to recommend for federal funds. Other projects will probably be getting local funds. And then winter 2026-27, MTC will tell us what projects will actually be getting OBAG 4 funds. And then we'll come back to this committee and the board with a final action for any of those projects that didn't get OBAG 4 funds. We'll probably use local GO-SONOMA funds. And then we did something very similar in the last cycle, where it was kind of a staggered set of recommendations, scoring, kind of waiting to see what happens with MDC, and then coming back with the final. And in our case, we only had 2 projects that did not receive OBAG 4 funds that we were nominated. One for City of Windsor for the Old Road Highway pavement rehab project, which I believe actually MTC is inquiring about the town's interest in receiving federal funds since another project lapsed. Another one for City of Petaluma on Lynch Creek Trail. So we've been pretty successful on picking what projects we think will perform well for OBAG 4, and we're hoping to do something similar again this cycle.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Joanne.
The question I have is, I know for OBAG cycle funds and any other MTC funds, there's going to have to be a transit-oriented community overlay or local jurisdiction ability to get it. I didn't see that in there. Maybe I missed it. But the viability of any jurisdiction's TOC compliance being a box that you check before you apply for the funds.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about including on the scoring criteria. MTC is going to be doing their separate evaluation process for the TOC policy that they discussed at the joint PAC TAC workshop we had, I believe, last week. So that'll be happening in parallel to our process, but it's something that we're definitely going to consider as part of what projects we nominate for OBAG, seeing which jurisdictions are the most in compliance with MTC's TOC policy.
The most in compliance as opposed to within those categories that they've laid out of not, or the majority or partially.
Right. I mean, there's the fully compliant, which I don't know if anyone's going to meet, and then there's the mostly compliant and somewhat compliant. We'll probably look at who's doing the best in all those categories to figure out.
So in that middle of the bell curve, if someone's at the low end of the bell curve versus the high end of the bell curve, they're going to be viewed differently.
Potentially.
Okay.
If that's the case, can you add that in the scoring for the projects? Because I mean, I think that's an explicit grading.
Well, at this point, we don't know where everyone's going to fall on that bell curve, and it's kind of a moving target. So it's hard for us to score that when we don't know how everyone's going to shake out under that. And then as your planning departments update their housing policies and land use things could change. So we're not wanting to make that a kind of a quantitative score for us.
Quick follow-up question to that. My understanding from the previous presentation was that communities that were not transit-oriented communities were eligible for all OBAG but for funding, right? So are we going to be impacted negatively on the scoring for what projects you recommend for OBAG 4 funding if we're not?
And that's why we're not scoring on TOC policy. It's just a consideration that we'll look at if, say, I'm just going to make an example. Let's say Sebastopol, let's say Cotati wasn't in compliance with TOC, but they're fully eligible for federal funds. Otherwise, we don't think they would perform great under MPC's TOC criteria, so we may not give them federal funds. But that's just an example, not thinking about Craig. If conversely, if Sebastopol or City of Sonoma were scoring well for OBAG 4, we would still nominate them because there's no need for them to comply with TOC policy.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, there is no action there, is that correct, David?
Yeah, the only action I would say is a look at the scoring criteria, and as Shauna requested, please give us any feedback on it by
15th.
May 16th.
15th.
Excuse me. I should note that we will be taking this item to the SCTA board on May 12th, just to give them a kind of preview of the scoring criteria, but also focusing more on encouraging them to talk to their peers on the governing bodies and to you all on what priorities should be. If there are projects they're thinking about, talking about those early on, maybe even doing some early public engagement and getting feedback from the public on those projects, and maybe even taking a council or board resolution to kind of enshrine those priorities sometime this summer once the call for projects actually happens. And we find that's very valuable to kind of document what the public and your elected officials' priorities are going into this call for projects.
I was actually planning on doing it in advance of the call for projects. That's not a problem, correct?
Yep, we encourage doing as much engagement early as you can.
Because my thought is getting council direction on the priorities in order to be able to do public participation on the top priorities, because we're not going to be able to do it for everything.
That sounds like a great plan.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Comments back by the 15th. Thank you, David. Item number 8, the SCTCA upcoming meeting of May 12th. Anything to be discussed there?
Usually Drew pulls that up for us, but I can tell you, I think we just.
Don't put Ross through that.
No. I was just gonna say. Board packets. Yeah, I was just gonna
Okay.
list off what we have. So, right now, we will be taking the TFCA program of projects that you guys all just approved today, approved recommendation, and TDA 3, program of projects. I will be presenting the maintenance of effort. It's on a consent item, so it's not really presenting so much as, just letting them know. There will be a resolution for Drew Nichols, because his first day was our last board meeting, his first day at MTC, so he wasn't able to be here for the last one. We will also be presenting on federal rideshare proposal, legislative updates. We will again present, as David just mentioned, the SCTCA funding program evaluation criteria. We will also be requesting approval of the preliminary budgets for SCTCA, Measure M, Go Sonoma, and TFCA. And then our standing activities reports from each of the departments.
And just to clarify, the presentation that Sean mentioned is actually a presentation on the road user charge that Caltrans and CDC have been looking at for the last 10 years or so. And there's a proposal, I believe, from a Congress member from Idaho or Colorado to look at a significant the annual vehicle charge on electric vehicles to help fund the Federal Highway Trust Fund. So we'll be getting a presentation on that.
Great, thank you. No other questions? On to item 9, just roundtable discussion, informational items, announcements. Anyone have anything?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I mentioned at the TOC policy workshop we had, but one of the things that MPC is going to be requiring for OVAG 4 and probably going on for the future, there's a requirement by Caltrans for HSIP funds to update your local road safety plans every 5 years. Previously, SCTA assisted most of the jurisdictions to adopt those in 2021, 2022. So we're coming up on the 5 years pretty soon. And we're trying to see if there's interest in going after maybe some federal Safe Streets and Roads for All funds to update those plans on behalf of the cities and the county. I know previously city of Cloverdale and city of Sonoma did not do plans. So we're wondering if that's something that you would want to look into to be able to be eligible for more federal funds. And then the county did their own plan previously, but we're wondering if the county would want to partner with us to make it get more streamlined and have everyone's plans updated at the same time. I believe last time we received some grants from Caltrans on behalf of the cities to do those plans, and then Shauna led a procurement process to select GHD as the consultant to prepare all those plans, so it was a little more streamlined. We're thinking maybe something similar this time around with SS4A funds could be done pretty easily, maybe in the neighborhood of about maybe 100,000 per jurisdiction, so about $1 million total. So we're wondering if there's any interest in pursuing that as a regional application, or if anyone else is looking at Safe Streets for All. There have been some changes in the NOFO to discourage things like road diets, since the new administration frowns on those, but it's very similar to the previous call for projects. So happy to answer any questions you may have or see if there's any further discussion on that.
Santa Rosa is looking at a project for planning a demonstration in the Roseland area. So we're like 85% sure we'll start that. Tomorrow I have a meeting with our grant writers to get some more info on how much of my time they would need, because if they need a lot, I can't do it, but that's what we're thinking.
I'm very new to this. I'm probably shy to speak, but I'm a list. The county would like to be involved in updating the plan, building the comprehensive plan out of the 2.0, whatever that looks like. It was said to me that we did our own, I don't know where it is. So we were definitely interested in doing that. And also, I did attend the Safe Streets for All webinar and asked outright if interoperable communication systems was something that could be tied to road safety. And the answer was yes. So Johannes would very much like to apply for not just an implementation grant, but a planning, supplemental planning grant to develop a plan that would encompass about $10 million worth of funding for that purpose for a countywide system. But specifically implementation for phase 1, which would be about $2.5 million, will be partnered with the Sheriff's Department on that. And then I guess the way that will support the, redesigning of the current plans is in the area of completely development.
Any other input?
I would just comment on what Shanagala said about the local road safety plan. Katahdin would be very supportive of doing what we did last time with a coordinated RFP that we could all leverage for our own plans, and then having a consultant procured that we could all use. That worked out very smoothly for us last time.
Yeah,
I would like to participate because we don't have one.
Yeah, exactly what Craig said. I can't believe it's been that long. It feels like we just finished it, but maybe it's that between Title VI and Safe Roads to School and ATP. There's a lot of plans out there.
As soon as you finish the last one, you gotta start the next one.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an endless cycle.
Nonstop. All right, anyone have anything else?
I have one quick reminder. That's not working. Let's talk loudly.
No, because I need to be able to get it for the.
Just a reminder that updates or revisions to the draft CTP project list are due next Wednesday. So a lot of fanfare for not that exciting of an announcement. So thank you.
Exciting.
Better next time. How about anyone open bids since the last meeting? We had a small concrete sidewalk, our TDA 3 project, and it came in far lower than we had anticipated, which is not something I've said in a long time. For a very low budget project too.
And do you know why? I mean, last month we talked about it and everything seemed to be attached to essentially oil prices for the HMA.
Well, this is
concrete.
Concrete, all concrete. It's just a sidewalk job. It was estimated at like 100 to 120,000 and it came in at 90. We had a lot of bids, for Healdsburg, that's kind of rare. I think we had 6 or 7 and they were all kind of well grouped.
Interesting. Good news.
I would just repeat what I mentioned at the last meeting. We opened bids and what awarded a contract April 8th or something, so quite a while ago, but you know, we had a slurry seal project about $600,000 and it came in about 12% under, mostly for lower HMA, you know, the asphalt costs. This is the city of Cotati.
Joanne?
We don't have any bids in, but I will say that we had our pre-bid conference on the Healdsburg extension work and we had over 60 participants, which we've never seen that kind of a turnout. And including teams who flew up from Southern California. So it was quite exciting.
Joanne, out of curiosity, what procurement method are you using? Is it CMGC or Progressive Design Build?
We're not legally allowed to use CMCG, but we are a progressive design build. So that is what we are using.
It's great to hear. Yeah, so I think we're all very curious what the bid environment's going to do. So it's probably something we can keep talking about future meetings. I think I talked to Shannon at Windsor last night and he was just kind of curious what folks have heard, but I'm guessing it's going to hit steel prices and construction materials first. It seems like with asphalt being down, we'll see if that changes, but it's kind of unpredictable right now.
Yep. All right, nothing else? Going once, going twice? Adjourned.